So we're about a week away from the launch of Borderlands 4, and since Borderlands 4 is going to have so many new systems and big system changes coming from previous Borderlands games, I want to go over all of the major systems of Borderlands 4 from this point up until the launch of the game. So hopefully people who haven't been paying attention to all of the Borderlands 4 information can watch these videos and get an easy understanding of all of these systems leading into the launch of the game. And in this video, we're going to be going over the weapon and license part systems, because this is going to cause Borderlands 4 to have the most crazy variation and possibilities within their weapons specifically, allowing for not only the most ridiculous combinations with different weapons, but also giving probably the most amount of a weapon RNG we've had in any Borderlands game. I think that's generally a positive thing because it always gives you something else to go farm. Even though you could get incredibly strong weapons without all the parts you want, getting that weapon with every single part you want to get like the best in slot weapon is just going to be an incredibly good feeling for a loot focused game. So similar to previous Borderlands games, you're going to be able to have 4 different weapons equipped at a time and freely switch between them in combat very easily. And then all of these weapons are going to have a base of one of the many weapon manufacturers that exist in Borderlands 4. And that's actually pretty important because once you add in the new license parts system, base of the weapon is actually one of the only things that makes that weapon what it is, because pretty much everything else of a weapon can be randomly rolled between all of the other manufacturers, because the license part system essentially allows any weapon to just roll with all of the different manufacturer parts on it. So you could get a weapon that the base of the weapon is a Vladoff, it could have a Hyperion scope on it, it could have a Maliwan elemental switch, and then it could have a Torg magazine. And not only is this weapon going to have all those different parts that maybe change up the stats of the weapon, but those different weapon part rolls will also give you effects specific to that manufacturer's weapon part. So you could get a Maliwan switch on a weapon, which turns a weapon into an elemental weapon and allows you to also switch to another element. You could have a Torg magazine on the weapon that maybe makes it shoot out sticky explosive projectiles that stick on the enemies you're shooting, and then when you reload they all blow up. And then you could also have a Hyperion part on the weapon where when you ADS it has the Hyperion shield on it. And because this system is essentially just randomly rolling all of the parts on the weapon, there will be such a ridiculous amount of different combinations you could possibly have, because with getting these other manufacturer parts, again, they're giving you the special effect of that manufacturer. So if you get that weapon with, say, Torg stickies on it and Maliwan, you now have elemental stickies blowing up for different elemental damage. And that's one of the more simple combinations. Once you get into all of the specifics of these manufacturers, the combinations just get absolutely ridiculous. Now, depending on the rarity of weapon you get, it's also going to have more or less possible weapon part rolls on it. So common will have 1, uncommon can have 2, rare can have 3, epic can have 4, and legendary can have 3, but legendaries also have their unique legendary behavior on them. So they still have 4 total rolls, but the legendary roll on a legendary is always going to be that specific legendary roll. And also legendary weapons can't randomly roll between every weapon part in the game, because developers have had more input on what parts can actually roll on legendary weapons, but there will still be a ridiculous amount of combinations. And because of the legendary effects being so unique, I think legendary weapons will still have some absurd combinations, even though they can't randomly roll everything. But because of all of these different factors, epics are also going to possibly be some of the best weapons of the game, because they can have 4 random rolls on that weapon. Because since epics are basically just completely randomly rolled and can roll basically every manufacturer part in the game, you can just get the most ridiculous combinations on epics. And epics will also have more RNG in trying to get the absolute best roll, because legendaries will only have 3 random rolls on it, where epics will have all of the 4 rolls as just being random. And it gets even more crazy when you realize all of the different weapon manufacturers can also have different weapon parts. So for instance, one of the main ones you would be thinking of if you play Borderlands 3 is a Jacob's part, where critical strikes will ricochet projectiles to nearby enemies. And there still is that weapon parts roll that you can get on a majority of the weapons in the game, but Jacobs also has another part where I think this is specifically a magazine where you will fire multiple projectiles at once. So pretty much every manufacturer is going to have multiple different rolls that do different things. And then when you start combining these, they're also going to do different and crazy things. And the interactions between them is just going to make everything completely and utterly ridiculous, especially because of how many manufacturers we actually have access to. So for the main weapon manufacturers, meaning all of the weapons can be one of these manufacturers as their kind of a base weapon roll. So what like the foundation of the weapon is, we have Jacobs, which are crit focused, Maliwan, which are elemental expertise, Vladoff, which are high damage and rate of fire, TDR, which are throw to reload, Torg, which are explosions, Ripper, which are fully automatic, Dauntless, which are reliable and can use multiple ammo types, and Order, which are charge and blast. Those are the main manufacturers, so every weapon you pick up will be one of those manufacturers. But then we have 3 other manufacturers that are parts, and that is Atlas, COV, and Hyperion. So you can't get a weapon with the base of it being one of those 3, but any weapon you get can have one of those 3 as weapon part rolls on it. So you can still get weapons with an Atlas part that has tracking bullets. You can still get weapons with a Hyperion shield on them. When you ADS, it brings up a shield in front of you. And this system gets significantly more crazy once you tie it into a lot of the other systems in the game, especially some of the gear pieces we'll be going over in future videos, where some of those gear pieces are specifically buffing or targeting specific weapon manufacturer part rolls that'll just buff up those weapon parts in new and interesting ways. So not only is this system just giving you like an infinite amount of variation in the weapons you can get, but it ties into a lot of other systems into the game that's just going to add a ridiculous amount of crazy potential combinations. And on a side note, when you first start playing Borderlands 4, weapons and how many parts they can have on them are going to work a little bit differently than once you get to higher levels. Let's say you get a legendary weapon at a really low level. That legendary isn't necessarily going to have all 4 of its weapon part rolls it can normally get on it. In fact, when you start getting higher rarity weapons at lower level, most of the time they will have less weapon part rolls on them than normal. Like if you get super lucky and get like a legendary weapon at level 10 or something, that legendary could legitimately only have its legendary roll on it. So it would only have 1 roll as opposed to the 4 it could possibly have. And it seems that the higher level you get, the higher chance to get more rolls on these items. So keep that in mind. You're not necessarily going to be getting all of these crazy rolls at lower level. But this is pretty much all you need to have a base understanding of weapons and the license parts system for weapons going into Borderlands 4. And there's just such a ridiculous amount of combinations that you'll just be able to spend hundreds of hours farming different weapon rolls, trying them out and trying to fit them into different builds and potentially even creating builds around those crazy weapon rolls you're getting. But that's all I want to go over. So thanks for watching.